Hi, I'm Jess.
And I'm Matt.
And I can't believe you haven't seen Steel Magnolias.
Now that I have, I want to know where I can buy that green and yellow bucket hat that Tom Skerritt has.
Yeah, you're not allowed to wear that.
Wonder if he wore that to the Masters. I feel like that's the right colors.
Probably.
Yeah, so welcome back to I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen with Jess and Matt. This time around, it is back to a movie I haven't seen that you have seen. You said a few times. How many times have you seen Steel Magnolias?
Oh, a bunch. This is like late 80s, early 90s classic, so not something I necessarily watched as a young person, but definitely, it's a classic.
Yeah, and one that just kind of has evaded me,
I guess.
Yeah, I was also 7 years old when this came out, and even being a movie person, just haven't really gotten back to it. So,
well, let's not talk about how old I was when this came out, but
a lady never tells.
Indeed. For context, Steel Magnolias is a 1989 movie categorized as a comedy drama, which I find interesting. Directed by Herbert Ross, starring just an insane cast of strong
like
strong
a murderer's
actors,
row, yeah.
But the female actors, the actresses, although I don't love that term, in this movie, unreal. You have Sally Field, you have Dolly Parton, you have Shirley MacLaine, you have Daryl Hannah, Olympia Dukakis, and Julia Roberts, just to round out the stars of the movie.
Yeah, there's a couple of other notable people. Tom Skerritt, as I mentioned, has one of the supporting male roles. Dylan McDermott also does. I think that's the two sort of notable other actors, I guess you would say. I didn't pick up on anybody else.
Sam Shepard.
Sam Shepard, I guess. Yeah, I forgot about Sam Shepard. Although he kind of hilariously sort of just bleeds into the movie, and I forget that he's in it because he's not outwardly Sam Shepard like he is in some other movies.
Fair, and in a movie like this, it's easy to blend into the background because there are a whole lot of wonderful, wonderful actors.
Yes, a lot of people. This was right in that time where you often had movies like this where you just get a whole bunch of really big names together. And I feel like outside of a comic book movie, that doesn't happen quite as often anymore. Although apparently Christopher Nolan is making a version of The Odyssey, I think, and it seems like 3/4 of Hollywood is subbing into it to be act in it at different times.
Well, that feels like a different problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, Steel Magnolias.
Yeah, Steel Magnolias. So
let's get into it.
As per usual, since I was the one that hadn't seen it, I will sort of direct with my thoughts, and Jess will pop in, and if I didn't touch on anything at the end that she wanted to bring up, we'll talk about it then. Now, this is a pretty famous film. Like, this was a pretty big deal when it came out. It did get one Oscar nomination for Julia Roberts for Best Supporting Actress. She won a Golden Globe Award. Sally Field was nominated for a Golden Globe Award. I think Shirley MacLaine won a BAFTA Best Supporting Actress, yes. Or was nominated. And then it was, we looked at this last night, tied for the favorite dramatic movie at the People's Choice Awards with Tim Burton's Batman.
On the same plane.
Very strange choice.
Very much the same kind of movie, yes.
Quite the combo. So, and it's a really big deal, and even though I hadn't seen the movie, I knew about its, reputation as a strongly female-led film. I had seen, I guess, a snippet of one pretty famous scene that we'll get into in one of my... I was trying to figure it out last night. It wasn't one of the AFI Top 100 lists because I was trying to go through if any of the actresses have been in one of those lists, and I don't know that they are, but I've seen that clip somewhere.
Well, you're a movie nerd, so it's not hard to figure out that you might see it somewhere.
It's true. I don't have a large overarching one to start necessarily, because the way this movie starts it kind of plops you in. Like, it doesn't set you up or does a lot of this. It's just like you are suddenly plunked down into the chaos of Shelby's wedding, Julia Roberts' character. And you really don't, you only are given context about it by what the characters say when you finally get down and get plunked into this chaos, including pistol shots from her dad, Tom Skerritt, trying to scare birds away. And immediately you figure out you're in the South because of everybody's accents, and eventually figured out that it's Louisiana. And you know that immediately, even if you don't know specifically that it's Louisiana. You do know that it's in the South. Partially because of the accents, which are, I mean, a Southern United States accent is one of the more noticeable accents throughout the world. If you know and you hear it, you go, ah, yes.
If you know, you know.
Southern United States. And also just some mannerisms that if you, again, know, and I've never been to the Southern United States, but you see a lot of media and a lot of stories and a lot of movies and a lot of TV that take place in the South, and the South as a concept you sort of become a little familiar with. What I put down as the Southern isms about everything, which, you know, you see in Tom Skerritt using a pistol to scare away the birds, and you see it in some of the houses and the way that pronunciations happen, even people's names. Very, you know, it's actually very specific to Louisiana, because there's a lot of them that have quite a French Creole tinge to them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I actually thought Shirley MacLaine's character was named Louisa for a long time, because they just referred to her as what I heard in my brain as Ouiser, and it turns out that her name is actually just Ouiser, which is like oui, yes, in French, S-E-R.
Yep. Ouiser Boudreaux.
Ouiser
She's very
Boudreaux.
Francais.
Yeah, even though she has not a lick of Francais in her dialect.
I think that's probably fair of a lot of small town Louisiana, to be fair.
And the accents that are out there is, again, one of the things you notice, and is one of the first things that very much stood out to me.
I was waiting for you to bring this up.
Yeah, and because it's the first thing that identifies the place. And you have so many people there that the part that stood out to me actually was half and half positive negative.
That's fair.
And this is the same thing that we have had conversations about with country music. I didn't really ever grow up with country music. I don't really listen to a lot of country music. It's not quite my style. Partly because, as you and I have discussed, so many country singers, especially nowadays, feel like they are putting on the fake twang.
You don't love fake twang?
No,
I'm shocked by this news. I didn't warn you about this heading into this movie. I shouldn't have given you any warning, because that's not how we do this. Mm-hmm. But were we watching this without the premise of doing a podcast, I probably would have given you a heads up, because I know how you feel about faux twang. And
faux twang, I think in singing, is really worse for me.
That's fair.
Because even this was sort of like, I didn't have any issues with like understanding anybody. I didn't have any issues with the dialect itself. It's like, okay, this is what it is. But I looked this up afterwards, because I was actually kind of interested as to where, specifically with the 6 main female actors, where they were all born. Because I know Julia Roberts is from Georgia. And she's been in movies where she's done that a little southerny. Erin Brockovich is one where it's sort of like, okay, this is, you can see that it's an easy leap to go from, like, if someone's from Georgia, you go, okay, yeah, you can hear a little bit of that in their voice. She's the only one that's actually from the South. Unless you count Shirley MacLaine, who was born in Virginia, but I think only one of her parents is from Canada.
Yeah.
And the other one is, I think, from the US, but she's born in Virginia. And I mean, I adore Shirley MacLaine. I've seen a lot of Shirley MacLaine movies. She does not ever sound like she's from the South when you just hear her talking.
I mean, is that on purpose? But that's a different question.
Yeah. And I mean, the only other, the obvious person here is Dolly Parton. Dolly is her reputation precedes her. Everybody in the world knows who Dolly Parton is, and Dolly Parton's voice is not a put on. Like, Dolly is Dolly.
I was gonna say, I think that's one of the things, I have thoughts about this, as do you. One of the things I like the most about this movie and the actors, it's a little like watching Dolly be Dolly in the best way. And for anybody who's listening to this who knows me, I frickin' adore Dolly Parton.
Yes.
Like, that, she is a gem and a national and international treasure who does not get enough credit for it. And unfortunately, just lost her husband.
Oh.
That's last
sad.
week. Don't listen to her new song if you don't want to cry. Just gonna put it out there. Sidebar. If you don't feel like tears, A, this is not the movie for you. And B, that is not the song for you.
Yeah.
But you talk about their origin, right? Where the actors were born and where the women lived in their accents.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Could you tell which ones were born in the South and which ones were not?
Completely. And actually, there were two of the women that I think it was kind of distracting with their accents and wasn't completely down with it most of the way.
I have a feeling I know which two you think.
And two of them where it was completely believable. And Julia Roberts, who is from Georgia, and Dolly, who is Dolly.
Yeah.
They will exclude them from this conversation.
Of the other remaining four.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the two most natural were Shirley MacLaine and Olympia Dukakis.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if that, they're older, but they weren't, I felt like Daryl Hannah and Sally Field were bordering on caricatures with their voice.
Interesting.
Especially Daryl Hannah. And I love Daryl Hannah. Like, Daryl Hannah's fantastic. But she was really trying.
So, question. Is Daryl Hannah's character really a caricature of a Southern woman?
Yeah.
And perhaps, extension, is Sally Field also a bit of a caricature or an exaggeration of a Southern mama?
No.
Interesting. I'm just, because you said it, like, bordering on caricature, and this is not something I had, it's not in my notes.
Yeah.
But it is something that I'm like, because they do kind of push, of the six, I'd argue, those are the characters that are pushed the hardest in that kind of stereotype, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it actually, the reason for Sally Field standing out in the way that it did for being too much, or a lot, I guess, not necessarily too much, because I don't know if it ended up being a bad thing or a good thing. It just is what it is. We've also seen her be the mom in Forrest Gump and do a similar accent. And I haven't seen Forrest Gump in a long time, but I don't feel like it was noticeably, oh, wow, she's really going for it type of accent. It seemed a lot more natural in Forrest Gump.
I mean, maybe it's because she had practice.
Possibly. And
Also,
Forrest Gump was 5 years later, so I don't know. I didn't look up to see if Sally Field had any other roles as a Southern woman in between or before this. So there may be some more there to discuss.
And admittedly, I haven't watched Forrest Gump in a long time. It's not a movie that makes this podcast. I have seen Forrest Gump.
Yes.
And you have said you haven't seen it in a while. Perhaps if we revisited it, we may feel the same way about her accent. I don't remember it being that way either.
So anyways, there's a lot of Southernisms in the movie. There's some points where I thought a lot of them were pretty authentic. I did think some of them bordered on too much caricature. Some of them bordering even a little on not being super kind to people from Louisiana and from the South, like making them seem more simple than they probably are. And, I get that we're talking about people from a small town in a certain area, and I think that's an implication that you would probably make for authenticity in a lot of ways. But it does get into a point that I want to bring up in a little bit. It seemed like there were a few things where I was like, oh, okay, we get it. They're small town folk with not a lot of ambition in Louisiana. Got it. And then it sort of kept pushing some in some of those ways, and I was like, okay, some of it was a little much, but it never felt like too much of a bad thing. It's just like, okay.
So I'm gonna hark on something you just said, pick up on it, that it made them seem perhaps simple. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. Oh, maybe we have to come back to this later, because I want to know what you think the core theme, narrative, ethos of this movie is.
Okay. We'll
come back to simple. Yeah. I wanted to talk about it now, but I think you've got more thoughts, and it's gonna... there's a thread I want to pull at. Okay. And the reason why I love this movie.
We'll get there.
Yep.
We'll get there.
It's all about me, even though I have seen it.
So next point. Actually, next couple of points. Kind of shorter points. Don't have to dive into them too deeply. Daryl Hannah with glasses. Is this ground zero for the trope of we're going to take a beautiful woman, put her in thick glasses, and suddenly she's not attractive?
I think this might be the precursor to She's All That. Yeah.
Yeah, This felt very like Rachel Lee Cook and She's All That, where it's just like, oh, we'll put a little extra makeup in her eyebrows to make them slightly heavier, and thicker rimmed glasses that are just like Velma from Scooby-Doo. And, oh, no, she's not attractive. And then when she takes them off, it's like, oh, she's the most attractive person in the room. Shocking. She's Daryl Hannah.
I'm sure no one said that, but yeah. I want to just pick up on something quick. For those of you who don't get to experience watching a movie with you and I need to quote something you've said out loud that relates to Daryl Hannah's character, Annelle, last night while watching it in the opening moments of the movie. And I quote, "Man, whatever happened to breath spray?" End quote. Matt, 2025.
Just mid-walking high heels down the road for Daryl Hannah. Just like, oh, man. Which is also like that's a nerdy stereotype in a lot of movies as well. Breath spray, just not a thing. We fully adopted mints and gum.
Guess we like the Listerine breath strips. I don't know.
God, those have gone out of favor.
Have they? I don't know. I just brush my teeth and hope for the best. In any event, I also floss if my dentist is listening. No, I think it picks up on that caricature of like being the nerdy, quiet one. But I laughed really hard last night with the observation of whatever happened to breath spray. So, nerdy Daryl Hannah, you may continue.
Yeah. And also, not even just nerdy, we find out later that it's like church-going Daryl Hannah.
Well, it becomes church-going
because initially she waltzes into town being mysterious about saying she has a married name but doesn't have a husband and is staying in a boarding house. And then she finds out that her husband, who was a convict who ran away and stole their things and all their money, is now in jail, and now she feels much more liberated and like just is wearing contacts and has her hair done more normally, even though she's a cosmetologist and looks like a frumpy version of Gilda Radner in parts of it. And then suddenly later she is back to frumpy glasses Daryl Hannah because now she's found Jesus again.
Well, it turns out you find God, he has your glasses.
Yeah. I think you misplaced these, madam.
Look what I found for you.
So that was a funny little trope I wasn't expecting, but it's also just like, oh, cool, we're going to do that to Daryl Hannah. Be a bit like these days saying, hey, we're gonna give Scarlett Johansson thick glasses and she's going to be the most unattractive person in the room.
Yeah, again, I honestly, it's not that long before She's All That comes out that this movie is released, and this is based on a play. I know we didn't talk about this earlier.
Yes.
But based on a play from 1987, so kind of in that, all in the same time period.
Yeah, and we will get there. I do want to talk about the stage adaptation.
Oh, excellent. Yes, indeed. But I think it's not long before She's All That.
And other movies.
That use that trope, so it makes sense.
Yeah. So short point. Next short point, I had Southern Salon equals barbershop. And again, I know this isn't a new parallel or a new trope or the first time in a movie that you see a barbershop being the quote-unquote center of where the tea is spilled or stories are shared between stereotypically women. But because it's set in a southern location, it did make me think a little bit of, again, something I haven't experienced myself, the male version of that, which is the southern or sort of more specifically like Georgia barbershop idea with men that, again, has literally been movie called Barbershop, and other movies that use the barbershop as sort of the male center of where people spread stories and where the men gather and news spreads.
Okay.
Again, don't want to dive into it more. I just, because of the accent, I was like, oh yeah, this is sort of the same trope, same thing. Didn't really, I don't know, I guess maybe I hadn't really ever seen a movie with a southern salon. Maybe it was the accent where I just went, oh, okay, this is similar to what I've seen in Spike Lee movies or Barbershop or Friday. I think Friday has a barbershop scene in it.
Wrong girl to ask, sorry.
Yeah.
I find it a little fascinating that you don't want to dive into this more. Not because of, I think because what you're picking up on is that comparison.
Mm-hmm.
For a movie that's all about women,
mm-hmm.
it takes place in many places.
Yeah.
But that setting is predominantly a place where women go and do. And I'm going to quote Lady Bridgerton here. We will do what women do. We will talk. Mm-hmm. And that's a thread I want to pick up on after. Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying in terms of trope and comparison.
Yes.
But I actually think the fact that there's so much that takes place in the beauty shop, quote unquote, mm-hmm. and what a strong female-led cast this is, it connects for a reason.
Yes. And the reason I don't want to dive into it is more just the drawing the parallel.
Oh, you have more thoughts later.
I think we're going to get into that as an idea, and that is because this is a female-led movie and is clearly a movie about female friendship and support amongst women in small towns or otherwise, but I think it's baked into everything we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
it just was like that one little thing that I
Gotcha.
don't really want to talk about on the barbershop side of it any further, but we'll get into the
Makes sense.
other stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. However, then it kind of goes into a pretty large topic that is pretty overarching, and I think even though I wrote it down really early in the movie, it did keep coming back up at that. Okay. And this story takes place in 1980s Louisiana. It isn't set in a previous decade or anything like that. Like, no. They mention growing up in the 80s. They mention things that are more modern, like someone in a small town has a gay son that comes out to them, nephew.
Yeah.
And so we're in a more progressive time. It's not trying to be the 50s. But holy smoke, is 1980s Louisiana the 1950s. It feels like they are 30 years behind in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And the first time that popped in wasn't long, but it was Shelby's wedding. And they have the wedding in all pink. We've had a very all pink weekend.
A lot of pink.
The two of us, outside of watching this, the day before, we, for the first time, watched Operation Petticoat, which is an old Cary Grant and Tony Curtis movie. If you've seen it, you know why pink is a thing. They at one point paint a giant submarine
like Pepto-Pink.
Pepto-Bismol pink.
It's very pink.
And Shelby, her wedding is blush and bashful.
Pink and pink.
Pink and pink. Pink on pink. A lot of pink. So it's been a very pink weekend in our household. You also got your hair dyed. Pink.
Yeah. Half of it, at least.
Half of it pink. So it's been a very pink weekend. But at the wedding, the reason why it clicked to me, like, wow, this is really old-fashioned, was during the reception when everybody was dancing.
Interesting.
All of it, I kept thinking, like, these are some weird-ass dance moves they're pulling. But then you just sort of go, like, no, these are, like, 1950s dancing around the jukebox at a diner.
They're sock hop.
Yeah.
It's a sock hop.
They kind of, again, because they'd already introduced it as being from the 80s, it felt out of place when you watch it. And then as I kept going, and after I made this note, that it was like, oh, this feels like the 1950s, and that Louisiana is maybe 30 years behind. And maybe that was the case. But also, it felt like a lot of the people in the small town they were in, a lot of the values of the people and the characters are kind of 30 years behind. And
I'm nodding like you can see me.
Yeah. And this goes a lot of different ways. it goes in the, the idea of family coming together and family not going too far away. Like when Shelby gets married, I don't even remember what her husband's name is. Jackson. That he's a lawyer. He's a Louisiana lawyer somewhere. They live somewhere out of town. She mentions at one point they're in Mobile, Alabama, where she meets someone who knows someone else from her small town. But they live probably in a larger urban part of center. Louisiana, whether it's Lafayette. It's probably not New Orleans if they're way up in the Northwest. But it feels sort of like we don't want to move too far away from our families because his family doesn't live all that far away. And nobody does too much to go too far away and don't have a lot of ambitions to go too far away, which is something that you saw a lot more in the 50s. People would be born somewhere, live with their parents, and then get married to someone and live down the street and get a job at the local industry, whatever it is.
Insert industry here.
Yeah. And that's a small town thing, but it also is one of the threads about being very 1950s feeling in a lot of it. It also comes up in the views of what is valued as far as people goes. And I guess the one big standout is probably one of the biggest story arcs in the movie is Shelby wanting to have children. And really, the reason why that's a big deal is because in an early scene at the salon, it's shown that she has a seizure and she's having a diabetic reaction.
Having a hypoglycemic attack.
Yeah, she's very, and like quite severe. So it's put out there immediately that this is a pretty serious medical condition that she is living with, and that clearly she's lived with for a long time, so much so that her mom is always on alert. Immediately when she starts having the attack, all the other women in the salon know what's going on.
Except poor Annelle.
Yeah, poor Annelle, who it's her first time in there meeting all these people, and she doesn't know what to do. But Dolly immediately knows, do I need to go get some juice? What do you need? They're all prepared. So they know to be prepared because they've probably lived through it at some point, or MacLaine has warned, Sally Field's character, MacLaine has warned them, or, they're good enough friends that they know this, and Shelby's 18 years old, so they've lived with it. And the one of the biggest story arcs is that after she gets married, and even beforehand, Sally Field has a very serious discussion with Dylan McDermott, Jackson, about her daughter wanting to have children, and very strongly recommending that they consider that as maybe not a tremendous idea because of her medical condition. And throughout the story, not long after, when kind of jumped to the next section of the story once she's already married and has moved out of town, reveals to her mom that she's pregnant, and her mom is not thrilled with that. And, Shelby's character basically is, wants nothing more than to have a child of her own as opposed to adopting. And that is a very, very, traditional 1950s sort of ideal of family.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have several thoughts about this, but specifically about Shelby. Does Shelby really want to have kids of her own?
Yes, because it sounds like they have talked about adoption and
buying a baby.
They made jokes about buying a baby, which is a thing. But they, early on they talk about, adoption and about there being lots of babies out there that need families. And that being an option that I think clearly her mom has brought up to her because of, the desire to be a mother.
Sure. So there's a reason specifically that I'm asking. Mm-hmm. When Shelby tells MacLaine that she is pregnant, and they have the whole, hey, it'd be great if you could have some kind of positive reaction to this, and MacLaine is clearly not because she suspects this is going to be bad news. Mm-hmm. And Shelby makes a kind of comment about how it will make things easier. Mm-hmm. What things do you think she's saying will make it easier?
I took that as to mean it's going to make me living with my condition easier.
Ah, see? That's not how I read it.
Okay.
Shelby's having a baby because Jackson wants it.
And that is a fair reading as well.
That is the marriage-saving baby, circa the 50s. So I think for me, especially in this kind of reading that you're talking about, in terms of, and the way I've phrased it is what's considered appropriate.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of other points, and I can come back to this, where what is appropriate and they're like sort of Southern traditional values, quote unquote, if we want to go that way. Family is very important. And if you're a traditional Southern Louisiana lawyer kind of man, continuing your line is actually what's important. Even though he has said to her, we can adopt, it doesn't matter, I just want to marry you. Based on that and other things that MacLaine makes comments about how it'll be easy for Jackson and Jackson's not carrying the baby and Jackson this. And the look on Shelby's face and the way MacLaine storms away when that happens, I don't read that as it's easier for her to deal with the fact. And she does then go on to say, like, I would take 30 minutes of happiness over a lifetime. So I do think that's there.
Yeah.
But I very much read that as the pressure to have a baby isn't just Shelby's desire, and she would maybe make a different decision if she didn't feel the pressure from her husband and or the need to, quote, like, save a marriage. Right?
Yeah. And it's
interesting.
Yeah, the way this story is done, I'm sure the way the play is, just like the movie, it kind of wholeheartedly ignores any of the men in the story. And that's intentional, right? Like, the story is not at all, and so we'll talk a little bit about this with the men in the story. It's not about any of them. No. And that's how it's written, it's how it's framed. So you don't really know. And there isn't really a lot of motivating conversations with any male characters, save maybe one, which I'll get to. But it very much is about the story of these women. So it does make sense that it could be kind of read either way.
Yeah.
And I think both can also be true.
Yeah, I don't know that I believe it's one or the other.
Yeah.
She's obviously a grown-ass woman at this point and is making her own decision. But I think in particular, if we're talking about the 80s Louisiana or Southern traditional values, which I think we hear even now, is one of those things that people kind of, the bless your heart, darling.
Yeah.
The way that kind of gets taken up is interesting to think about it on either side, right? So what is Shelby's motivation for having a baby? Does she just desperately want to be a mom? Probably. Yeah. Is there also pressure coming from external forces? Also probably. Both can be true.
Probably, yeah. That's maybe the most jarring difference in watching it between that time period and modern times. Like, there's always, when you watch a movie from a lot of years ago now, 35 years ago.
You did the math.
Yeah,
36,
34,
but we're fine,
whatever.
It's fine.
There's certain things that either change in society or opinions or language, certainly. The biggest, most jarring thing in this movie is kind of that. And, MacLaine, I think, is the most progressively thinking of all of them. And I think that might have something to do with because she works specifically in mental health, it sounds like.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, and so she's working in an area that is probably a lot more progressive than most of the society around her is in, whether it's psychology or therapy or understanding mental illness. It's come a long ways in 35 years. But at that point in time, it wasn't really ingrained into society. It was just, if you are a woman and you are considered a success, you are a mother and you have children of your own and you have a husband that you live with and who loves you, and that is enough.
And the husband who loves you is optional in some cases.
Yeah, exactly.
The husband, whether he loves you or not, meh, depends.
Is he there? Cool.
Is there a dude? Does he work? Great.
Ding. Does he shoot blanks at birds? Ding.
Oh, drum. There's a deep part of my heart that loves that opening, and we can talk about that. You do talk about being dropped into the chaos. It is chaos, and I love it. You talk about, being married and having kids and being at home. The first conversation we really see all the women having together is the hair salon for Shelby's wedding.
Yeah.
And what is the conversation about what Shelby should do after she gets married?
I don't actually recall.
They talk about how she shouldn't be working. And how Jackson doesn't think she should be working, and Malin doesn't think she should be working, but they're for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And Shelby's insistent that she wants to continue to work, and she's a nurse, from what I can understand. And that's kind of, you only get bits and bobs.
Pediatric nurse?
Yeah, she works in the hospital in some capacity, whatever that happens to be. But she is on her feet a lot, and so there is that conversation about, well, now you're married, you shouldn't have to work. And all the women seem to agree. So there is that kind of traditional value in there as well.
And actually, Olympia Dukakis and Shirley MacLaine's character, they're older, but they both seem to have money from either a being widowed or being twice divorced.
Well, you don't really know. I think for Clarice, Olympia Dukakis, yes, it's from being widowed. Mm-hmm. Shirley MacLaine, Lord knows.
Well, Ouiser talks about being married to the two worst men in history, and that's good enough for her, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It could very well be from her two divorces. Also, Ouiser is a weird one, and I adore Ouiser's character. I can't even express. That you kind of wonder if Ouiser doesn't have family money. With a name like Ouiser Boudreaux in a small town southern riding, for lack of a better term, is it possible that she just has family money? Possibly. And that's why she can be an eccentric old divorcee times 2 with her dog that has hair patches falling out. Anyway.
That's possible too, and I want, if she had family money, if she was twice divorced, she would have a lot less of her family money because you split it unless you have a prenuptial agreement.
Well, I imagine that didn't exist much then.
But maybe she married rich twice and took half their stuff. And now she has money and doesn't have to do anything. Who knows?
Ouiser's allowed to be who she is because she has money.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other thread to pick up on.
Yes.
Sorry, traditional values.
Traditional values. And because it, in Shelby's case, means that medically, because she's making that decision, she is going to put herself knowingly in a potentially very serious medical situation, which turns out exactly to be the case. And it's pretty, again, this is a movie that's been out forever, so lots of time for spoilers. But
and spoilers.
It was pretty obvious to me early on. Like, I think when she was having her first hypoglycemic event, it's pretty clear from that event, and even just the score in the background, that this is a very serious thing, and it's probably going to end with her not being alive, and that everybody else is going to have to deal with that. She is knowingly putting herself in a spot with her health that if she doesn't know that this is probably or potentially going to happen, then she's just willfully ignoring her own doctors. And that is something you would see a lot less of these days.
I think that's fair. There's, in this Shelby and babies and being told she shouldn't have them thread. I don't know if you picked up on this, but in that first conversation in the beauty salon at Truvy's, where they're getting ready for the wedding, and Malin says, her doctor says she shouldn't have babies. Mm-hmm. Do you catch who does apologizing and to whom? And if you don't, that's fine. I'm just asking.
I didn't recognize the voice because there's a big flurry.
There's a lot happening
at that point, and I want to say maybe it was...
Truvy apologizes to Malin. She doesn't tell Shelby she's sorry she shouldn't have children. Mm-hmm. She tells Malin she's sorry Shelby can't have kids or shouldn't have kids.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting, again, hitting on those values and the sort of set in the old days.
Yeah.
They didn't apologize to the woman who's been told she shouldn't have kids. She apologizes to the mother of that woman. And
they also, when her attack starts happening, they're talking, but nobody's talking right to Julia Roberts' character, and she actually gets mad at them, even when she's in the middle of attack, saying, "Don't talk about me like I'm not even here."
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing, because it's probably a reaction to a bunch of people in an era that don't really, maybe mentally aren't equipped to deal with that. So they just treat someone like an other in that segment until she's better, and then she's fine. We can treat her like a normal person again.
I think that's fair. There's also something to be said about the young woman in the beauty shop, because that comment gets made that day of her wedding as well. Mm-hmm. Are young women not allowed to go to the beauty shop until they're married? Because all of the women otherwise are married or twice divorced. Thanks, Ouiser.
Yeah.
Or widowed, but all of them have been married or are married.
Mm-hmm.
And Shelby's about to be. And it almost seems like it's her first time being in this shop.
Yeah.
And so do they talk about her as though she's not there because they don't know how? Because it seems like they have a very close connection otherwise. Now, ostensibly other women come into this shop. We never see that.
Yeah.
But these women seem to know each other so very well that they're used to that kind of flow of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And as a woman who has friends that she's known since the dawn of time, when we have a conversation, it is 9 snippets of something, and we're not necessarily talking to a human, we're talking about, or we're here, we're there, we can pick up on what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's really what that scene feels like to me. But Shelby being othered for either being the young woman who's first walking into this or for her illness is an interesting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's part of that same point of it just being about 30 years behind. And we don't talk about the illness outwardly to anybody.
So the illness is Bruno. We don't talk about it.
Ooh. To go a little on an offshoot from scenes from the salon, as we've just talked about, I have the note: eggs in the trunk of a car.
Yeah, you were deeply upset about that.
So Shelby's wedding takes place at Easter, maybe even
does.
on Easter Sunday. Is that possible?
I think it's actually the Saturday before Easter Sunday,
Okay.
only because the eggs have to be at the church by noon or they won't get hidden.
Okay.
Is a comment that Truvy makes to her no good husband who won't dye more eggs. Feel how you want to feel about that. And so my understanding, the way I've always read that timeline, is the wedding's happening Saturday, the day before Easter.
Yeah. Okay, that would make sense. And what the eggs we're talking about here is...
Makes more sense than the eggs.
Cartons and cartons and cartons of eggs that have been dyed for clearly to be hid for an Easter egg hunt by a bunch of children. And how big is this church? Because I would be willing to bet there was like 40 dozen eggs.
A lot of eggs.
That they dyed.
A lot of eggs.
It seems like overkill. But we're in God-fearing country, so maybe everybody shows up for an Easter egg hunt. But
He is risen, he brought eggs.
They inexplicably place these eggs into the trunk of what looks like an old Cadillac and stack them far higher than the trunk can actually close. So, like, what is the plan there? Are we just closing the trunk a little bit and putting a bungee cord around it?
Yeah.
What's the plan?
We're just gonna strap her down and hope for the best.
We're just gonna put them in there, and then when someone speeds by, or they kind of move over and slam the trunk down, and all of the eggs get broken. Well, yeah, of course they did. What was the goal? They were all gonna get broken because you put them in the trunk of a 1980s Cadillac, anyways.
Well, I mean, it was not an old Cadillac at that point, I guess. It's Ouiser who slams the lid.
Yes.
Because she's chasing down her dog.
Yeah.
Ouiser and her dog, man. Ouiser and her dog.
Yes, but just that setup, like, it felt like a Marx Brothers slapstick setup. But like, what is the goal there? You're not putting them in a back seat or spreading them around to be like, hey, we might be going over a pothole or two as we drive these somewhere.
Ain't got potholes.
Gonna put them in the hard bottom of a trunk, stacked so high that we can't close the hood. What's the plan there?
To be honest, I'm not sure there was a plan. It was a day full of chaos up to that point, right?
It's true.
So keeping in mind what's happening that day, chaos everywhere.
And it may have just been a temporary thing. I just thought it was not tremendously well thought through on Truvy's, which is one of the very few things that isn't very well thought through on Truvy's end. She's pretty good overall.
Yep.
She's got her stuff together.
Just them eggs.
Running a salon. Even running 2 salons by the end of the movie. Small point, just was like, what are we doing here? What's the plan?
Sup with the eggs. Yeah, that's fair. It's a time.
It's a time. Next one is a point that starts off with a joke, and it's not even a joke that necessarily stems directly from this movie, but it's one that I made at a different point in our lives recently, and I'm now carrying it over to this movie. That has to do with Dylan McDermott, who now has, this is very young Dylan McDermott. Like, he was probably in his early 20s when he was in this movie. He has now been in, any number of things, including...
The Practice.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you know, the thing that I would remember him from, or remember him getting to be quote unquote big, would have been that he was in The Practice. He has been in a lot of things in between then and now. He's a pretty recognizable face. And I think a lot of times he's probably been in roles or movies where he is there for the recognizable face as generic attractive men. And he also has not really looked any different from the time he was in Steel Magnolias until probably 30 years later. So I will hereforth refer to Dylan McDermott as the demographic, because he could be anywhere between the ages of 20 and 45. Kind of looked the same through most of those.
Are you ready for me to tell you how old Dylan McDermott actually is?
Oh my god, nowadays? 67.
63.
Okay.
Well done.
Close. But he is one of those actors that just has looked the same for several decades of his life. Probably through good genetics. Maybe through synthetic means, but that's not for us to judge. But yeah, he is going to be referred to as one of many people that could be the demographic.
He does kind of fit that.
Yes. But he doesn't actually have a lot of screen time in this movie. He is Shelby's husband, so he's in the wedding scenes early on, even though he's not even in a lot of those. And you see him throughout the movie in different points, but he's not there a lot. And neither is a lot of the other male characters. And the note I have is just talking about the male support in this movie. Not about as being a supporting character, but the men and the support of the women in this movie.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, it's probably going to be a short conversation for examples, because it's not a lot.
Oh, you mean of the men supporting the women?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's real low. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty low. And some of those are probably for a point. I think in Dylan McDermott's case, he's a lawyer. Lawyers stereotypically and in real life work a lot of long hours, make a lot of money, and sometimes have to travel depending on what their caseload is or what they're taking on. So it does make sense you don't see him as often, because his wife probably doesn't see him all that often, or lives a good chunk of her life without seeing her husband. Okay, that's his case. Tom Skerritt, drum. Oh boy, does he not have any fashion sense. I already made the joke about his hat.
Such a good hat.
But that he is wearing that hat twice, early on and then later on in the film. And both times at the same time with a green and yellow bucket hat, he is wearing like red and blue plaid shirt. He might be colorblind.
No, it's majestic. I want to hear nothing further.
They do not go together. And we see him more because he's involved in a lot more threads, and Sally Field is the main character in the film. So we do see Drum more.
Yep.
And I think he is is stereotypically very eccentric and kind of wrapped up in his own thing, as his sons are too, in the small amount of time they're in there. They're sort of just rabble-rousers and shit disturbers doing whatever they want, kind of what Skerritt does. But he also is, at times, there in silent support of his wife, especially in the scenes where they're in the hospital when Shelby is in a coma. He is there a lot. Not as much as Sally Field, which is not necessarily he's not there, it's only Sally Field showing up. I think Sally Field is probably there way more than she should be for her own mental health. But he is there for his wife, even though she makes offhanded comments that I try not to be around my husband too much. Ha, ha, ha. And they don't seem to have a whole lot in common, but they've made a life together, and they seem to have their own part of that. But it never feels like he's leaving her in the lurch. Interesting. Okay. But again, he's not. We don't see a lot of that, so you can only sort of see that from the fact that he is there as a silent, stoic pillar, and maybe it's all the time, maybe it's not all the time. We only see what we see. He also maybe is probably a little more on the side of his daughter when she announces her pregnancy. Yes. Which is not tremendously considerate towards his wife. He, I think, is doing a little more being a proud grandpa to be for everybody around town instead of being sympathetic to the thoughts of his wife and the well-being of Shelby in the future. So he maybe cares a little more about what people think of him and what people see of his family than the thoughts of his wife. So there is that.
I have thoughts on Drum, but go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And you have the man that Daryl Hannah's character gets involved with. Sammy, who makes a good cherry Coke, puts up Christmas decorations, has a rockabilly haircut. It's about what we know from Sammy.
Oh, he makes a mean Easter bunny on the back of a motorcycle.
That's true. He is wearing a really bad paper mache bunny head, which I remark to you is not as good as the costumes from my new favorite recent movie, Hundreds of Beavers.
It's true. Yeah, they would have benefited from a few hundreds of beavers.
If anybody's listening and hasn't heard of or seen the movie Hundreds of Beavers,
just go watch it.
Just go watch it. It's currently on Amazon Prime streaming. It may not, depending on when you're listening and if it's still there. But go look up the trailer, and it's like a 2-hour Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner movie, and is maybe the funniest movie I've seen in a decade.
Honestly, I feel like there doesn't need to be any more intro. Just go see it.
Just go see it.
Just find it.
Anyway. And the only other, I guess, male support that's there for an extended period of time, although kind of in the middle is not quite there so much, is Truvy's husband. Spud. Who initially is sort of shown as kind of a mechanic-y trucker type of dude who maybe isn't there as much because he's a trucker, and Truvy sort of complains that she has a useless husband because he's not around as much, even though she doesn't like harp on it. Then in the middle of the movie, as some time has passed, he isn't working because he's been outbid for a contract and he's kind of down about that. And they have a nice little moment where he doesn't feel like going to the fireworks with them, even though they do it all the time. And she is, they have a nice little conversation. And then later on, after more time has passed, he is working on an offshore oil rig, probably in the Gulf of Mexico, I would assume, if they're in Louisiana. So again, he's not around as much, but he seems to be someone that is either doing work or looking for work that's out of town or anything else. But he also, at the end, when Shelby's funeral is happening, wants to go and wants to be there with his wife to support. What's the name of their family? Eatentons. It's an awkward last name. Yeah, he does want to go with Truvy to be there for the Eatentons. Like, he does have some feeling like he has some responsibilities as a husband that when he's there, he's more than willing to take on. And I think he actually ends up maybe feeling like the most supportive male character in the whole movie.
I would argue that's true. I'd agree with you. Mm-hmm. I have thoughts about your early perception of Spud because I think perhaps you missed something, mm-hmm. or we see things very differently. Okay. And isn't it fun when we watch a movie together? And in this case, I don't think it's so much like form and content, which mm-hmm. is often how we watch things differently. Yep. This time I think it's male perspective, female perspective. Mm-hmm. He's not looking for work in the beginning. Mm-hmm. She makes a comment about the most romantic thing her husband's done for her since 1972 is enclose their car park so she can have a hair salon and support him. Mm-hmm. He's not... he's not working at all. It's not that he lost the contract. Because there's also a comment Malin makes about wanting to build a basement, basically, which I assume is not a very common thing in Louisiana homes.
Wouldn't be.
And she says something about a room under our house, I think, is kind of as they're walking away. Okay. And she says, oh, if you could give Spud a job, I would love that. Or love you forever, or what have you. Okay. So there is kind of this... Spud is very much a useless husband mm-hmm. to start with. And she says, well, God gave you the ability to go. That's why God invented the A&P, because it's the first time we're introduced to Spud. He's supposed to be dyeing the rest of these frickin' eggs mm-hmm. to put into the back of the car to get smushed. Yeah. Right? And he's not. He's not finishing it because he ran out of stuff and he doesn't have the initiative to actually go get the A&P and get the stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And there's also a son there that she kind of we talk about. We don't really get to see a whole lot of him, and we don't see a lot of the men in general, but we really don't.
You see him take off on his motorcycle.
Twice. That's
Twice.
kind of it.
Once with normal hair, once with dyed colored hair.
Rainbow hair. Love a rainbow hair, personally. But it's that kind of stereotype of the useless husband.
Yeah.
And I wonder, too, if Spud, I don't want to dig too deep into his own personal psyche, but if he feels, because he's not providing, that fits into this, that makes him more useless, or he's more ornery, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Because then when she says, well, we always go see the fireworks, that's when he decides he doesn't want to. And up until Shelby's funeral, he never goes with his wife.
Yeah.
He doesn't go to the wedding. He doesn't go to church. She doesn't expect him to want to go to the funeral either. And I think the turning point for them isn't the funeral. It's the conversation she has with him while he's under the car.
Yes.
Talking about the transplant.
Yeah.
Malin donating her kidney to her daughter. And that's when he kind of goes, oh, and she's like, I think the thing with the Eatontons is they all know how much they mean to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the turning point for Spud.
Yep.
And Truvy's the one who's got her shit together. That girl's taking care of it.
Yeah. And eventually, by the end, not only does she have her shit together, and it seems like he does, but they both do, to the point where she can open a second salon.
And he seems to surprise her with that, so that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's good. But it all kind of rolls into the idea that, even though the movie is very much about the women that support each other and the friends in the small town that are there for each other through quite literally absolutely anything, they don't rely on their men for shit. And the men don't really do anything. They just have their own stuff, and it doesn't really concern any of the women.
So when I talked about what is the ethos of this movie at the beginning, full disclosure, you guys, whoever's listening to this is hearing this in some time from now, but we watched this on and recorded this after International Women's Day. So
perfect timing.
It's almost like I knew. I think for me, yes, they're not really concerned. This movie isn't just about female friendship and the way that women support each other. This movie is about the way that women keep the world running.
Yes.
And if they weren't there, would anything get done?
Yep.
Would that wedding have happened if Malin is not also putting these incredible 1980s pieces of, floral up on the side of the house? It's phenomenal. Or organizing the people with the broken wine glasses. What's Drum doing? He's shooting birds out of a tree.
Yep.
And he's got his 2 kids with him.
Who are putting ice down their mom's back.
And shooting birds out of a tree. And then they're like, oh, we've got it. Don't worry about it. We'll just fling this arrow into the tree.
Yep.
And have whatever that is, I think, caps that go off, right? They light it and then caps keep going off and it pops in the birds. But this is a movie about women supporting women. It's also about the invisible work of women. Yeah,
everything that they're doing is the base, the backbone, whatever metaphor you want to use for it is. They are the ones that allow kind of everything else to happen. And a lot of what happens in the movie is you see them at times when they get that time for themselves as this is the time we have away from being the pillars that support the rest of the community. They are in the salon. They are at the fair. They are there with Jackson Jr. once he's born, playing with kids. They are walking in the park at the end. It's the points when they get a chance to breathe and be themselves.
And I would argue with you that, no, not with you, but I'd argue the only times they have a chance to breathe and be themselves of what you've listed is when they are in the park, which is a whole other moment, and when they're in the salon. Even when they're with Jackson Jr., even when they're at the fair, they're not just at the fair having fun. I mean, Clary probably is, but the 2 of them are working.
Yep.
Right? They're volunteering. They're serving up a crawfish boil or whatever the heck that happens to be, and iced tea. The only times you really see them are then, which is also interesting when we talk about the men being kind of nowhere. Where's Jackson? Because Shelby says at that Christmas fair, Jackson's never been to the fair.
Yeah.
As far as we frickin' know, he still hasn't. We didn't see him.
Yeah.
Was he there? He may have made it like a sidebar appearance, but I don't remember any words he says.
No, I don't remember seeing him there at all.
So, there you go.
Yeah.
Also, Shelby has to deliver the news of her pregnancy to her mother alone. And she does comment about, well, we wanted to do this. We wanted to do this with you and Daddy, but you and Daddy are never together. Neither are she and Jackson. So, interesting.
Yep.
So, before we move on to your next point, this is something I promised someone else I would do. I just want to take a brief moment and say, Laura, if you're listening, bless you for sneezing.
How we heard it from this far away, you'll never know.
You're welcome. And now you may continue.
Now we're going to continue. On to a lighthearted point.
Oh, I do like those.
To touch on maybe one of the funnier things in the entire movie. That is not Shirley MacLaine related, although it is also kind of Shirley MacLaine related.
Phenomenal.
Jackson's aunt and the groom's cake, which is, am I going to try this with the accent? An armadillo.
Oh, it's a frickin' armadillo.
Frickin' armadillo with gray icing and a red velvet cake. So when it is cut and served at the wedding, it just looks like you're cutting and serving a dead, bleeding armadillo.
Yeah, I do like you'll have to come and have some bleeding armadillo cake, I think is the line.
Fantastic. However, she was 30 years ahead of being the hottest thing on social media.
Oh yeah, she's straight up ahead of her time.
Did she invent the is it cake meta in social media?
Perhaps.
There's a question. I mean, the armadillo doesn't necessarily look like a realistic armadillo, but
it is an armadillo-shaped cake.
It is the is it cake thing. There are entire shows on streaming dedicated to this concept. Did it start with a bleeding armadillo cake?
I don't know, that cake is phenomenal. I think I actually have a note, because I know it happens. I knew it was there. But I believe my actual line is, armadillo cake is amazing, because it kills me. And you say it semi-relates to Ouiser. When she chops off the butt end of that cake and hands it to Drum, because there's an ongoing Ouiser Drum thread about how they hate each other, but actually don't.
Yeah.
Because Ouiser is a cranky old woman who lives next door, and Drum is just doing stuff to
antagonize her.
Fuck up her shit. And so it's this really entertaining scene where she hits off the end of it with this giant knife. It's got the red velvet. She hands it to him, and he goes, I do love a piece of ass.
Love a good piece of ass, yeah.
And phenomenal. 10 out of 10, Drum. But yeah, the cake.
So funny. That's my vote for best joke in the movie.
Especially compared to the big, 5-tiered cake you see in the beginning. Yeah. Which is Shelby's wedding cake. And Annelle sort of sees it being delivered to the house as she's walking by it in the early scenes. It's really funny to see the comparison of this very 1980s tiered, roughly pink, obviously, wedding cake versus this bleeding armadillo cake. It's so good.
There's a lineup for that armadillo cake.
I bet it tasted great. It was red velvet. The other one probably isn't red velvet, because then you can put white icing over it, but it's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, and all you need to simple recipe. Just need a lot of patience.
Yeah, something about it takes a lot of patience, which it absolutely does, having carved cakes once or twice myself.
No kidding. So again, a little segue, but Ouiser. We could do I could do 5 podcasts about Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine, I think as I get older and watch even more movies with her, and I've been watching movies with Shirley MacLaine for a very long time, because she was still alive when I was alive watching a lot of movies. So I remember her being in a lot of things that were current and modern when they came out. And then going back and watching older Billy Wilder movies. The Apartment is one of my favorite movies of all time.
I just need to point something out to be kind to Ms. Shirley MacLaine. She's still alive.
Dear. Oh yeah, she's just not acting.
Oh, the way you said that sounded like she had passed. You said she was alive when I was watching a lot of movies, and I want to point out that she might have been active. Yeah. Shirley MacLaine, very much still alive, is in her 90s.
In her 90s would have to be, yeah.
Yeah, will be 91 this year.
There you go. Well done,
Shirley MacLaine.
But she's amazing, and she's given some of the best comedic performances of all time. She also is very, very adept at being a dramatic actress as well. She has a huge amount of range, and I think probably is, if you look at the history of movies, probably one of the more underrated actors there is, that was also one of the most well-known actors.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, she's amazing, and she's the reason this movie works.
If there's no Ouiser, there is no movie.
No. Like, even if there is Olympia Dukakis, who is ostensibly playing a similar type, an older woman who is not married anymore and is incredibly sarcastic and kind of doesn't give a shit about anything.
Yeah.
They're playing similar characters in slightly different types. Ouiser's a lot more ornery.
Yes.
And is it... What's Olympia?
Clary.
Clary is much more of a smartass and will do kind of what she wants and kind of doesn't care about anybody. But if it's only her, I don't think this movie or play works at all.
No Ouiser, no play.
Yeah.
No Ouiser, no movie.
And, you know, for a supporting character to kind of carry the heft of the movie in a way that isn't very showy or flashy. You know, there's other examples that I can think of like that, but it doesn't work if Ouiser's not there. I was trying to think of another actor that could work in that role.
I feel like Ouiser is very much a Shirley MacLaine role.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with anybody. And I didn't actually look back to see who played Ouiser in the stage production, the original one. It may very well have been Shirley MacLaine, because she did stage acting as well.
She did.
But she is far and away, A, my favorite character in the movie, B, the character that makes the movie work, and C, is probably, mentally speaking, the healthiest character in the entire thing.
That's probably fair.
And, you know, I think everyone else has something there where they are either compensating for something or really burying a lot of emotions or ignoring a lot of things and just in order to just exist. And Ouiser, it seems to me, is the one person that is completely 100% comfortable with who she is and completely understands how to, you know, relate to someone, how to react to someone. When Shelby announces that she's pregnant to everyone else, you know, when her dad is announcing that she's pregnant and all the town is so happy for her, and Sally Field has to leave the room because she's going to be emotional, and all of the rest of the women leave because they're going to go support her. The only person that understandably is not happy for Sally Field is Ouiser, because she gets it. She knows that this is not a celebration. This is a reason for concern. And the other women are all just so happy that Shelby is pregnant. She's going to have a baby. I thought she wasn't going to be able to have a baby. Like, that just clouds their brain. And Ouiser's the only one super in tune with, no, this isn't a good thing. Malin's not in a good state because of this. And I think she's the only one that probably understands top to bottom better than anybody else kind of how to behave. Even when she goes to church and winks at Owen, the man that she's clearly seeing, even though everybody else knows, oh, she kind of likes this man Owen. Because
he's from her past.
And she just is kind of denying it and sneering it off because that's who she is. But then she shows up to church and just winks at him and continues to, like, not really acknowledge his existence. Because it's like, no, it's none of anybody else's business. Get bent. Eat shit and die, as she literally says to Drum at the end of the movie.
She does do that, yes.
And she just is like, no, it's none of your business. We're not talking about it. Go away.
I think when you pick up on that, Ouiser being the one who gets it, Ouiser's also the first one who goes. So in that announcement, because it's like a Christmas party at their house, Ouiser is the first one to get to Malin because she's not going to congratulate Shelby. The other women go and do the congratulations first. And Ouiser goes, well, nope, shit, this is bad, immediately. Ouiser's also the one who taps Clary at the cemetery scene.
Yeah.
And gestures at Malin. She's not the only one who goes. They all get it and they figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
But she's the one who first. Ouiser is the most emotionally intelligent of all of the women, but she gets played off in the beginning as being, oh, Ouiser, because her entrance is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. The end.
So good. The overly large Saint Bernard, who I'm forgetting the name of now.
I don't know that we ever learn. It's just Ouiser and her dog.
Just great big dog. Love it.
That's Ms. Ouiser and her dog. Standing on the front porch yelling, "Drum, I know you're there." And honestly, I think the thing that makes me laugh the hardest is, I think there's someone at the front door. Yeah, I think it's for Dad. The two boys who are like, we're not getting anywhere close to that. Miss Ouiser is mad. And the conversation about where those Magnolias from, is that my tree? Well, they haven't determined whose tree it is yet. Yeah. Like, it just, it's so good.
Do you think secretly that Ouiser is the one that runs the local chapter of the Democratic Party in Louisiana?
Oh, probably.
I feel like she is that woman that would like be campaigning in the 80s just against anything Ronald Reagan is doing.
I think Ouiser is the one who can call out the bullshit the best. So yes, probably. Because there's that whole scene where Clary is the color commentator about the uniforms. She's the color commentator literally talking about the color of the football uniforms. Yeah. And I think the line is like, just shut up. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. They're here to listen to football.
They want to talk about injuries and scores, not the color, not that grape bullshit, I think is the line.
Yeah.
I wish I could quote this movie better. But yeah, so it's that Ouiser is the one who can see below the surface.
Yeah.
The best. I think all of the women do. I firmly believe they all see below that sort of, that surface level, this is everything's fine and welcome to this small town and look at how happy we all are. Yes. I think they all get there. I think they all know that, and I think they all see it. But the one who sees it first and most completely, and I would agree with you, is Ouiser.
Yeah, and everybody else sort of has something. Like, I think that, you know, Olympia Dukakis kind of is she is there for the joke all of the time, even when it's inappropriate. And in the big climactic scene at the cemetery, it's entirely inappropriate, but also exactly what's needed. And I think that's her saving grace, is that she is always there for a laugh, even when it's not needed. And in that case, it was, but it also was hilarious and completely inappropriate, but exactly the right thing. So she's still, you know, like, I think she's playing off a lot of, like, maybe being widowed and not knowing what to do with her money. You know, she buys the radio station, and I'm going to become the color commentator of the radio station. I would imagine working for her at that radio station would have been a nightmare, because she would have been so flippant and, I'm going to choose to do whatever I want and go as a color commentator for the football team.
Oh, why the hell not?
So I feel like she's there for a laugh, probably to a fault at sometimes.
I understand Clary on a deep spiritual level for that, because sometimes I also am there for the laugh.
Yeah.
Too far. I wonder too, just because I don't want to lose this thread, we'll come back and talk about that scene, I'm sure, but is that why Ouiser is so hurt when Clary makes the joke? It needed to happen.
Yeah.
It's exactly the right time. But is that why Ouiser leaves and calls her, I think, a pig from hell is the quote. Yeah. Is that why Ouiser gets so upset? But also, I think interesting that these women forgive each other so easily. But anyway, that might be a different point of this. But I think because Ouiser sees and feels that full emotion, she's the most emotionally mature. Yeah. Is that the reason she's so upset when she's the brunt of the joke at that point? I
think so. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Anyway.
And you know, all of the other female characters have something. You know, they all are really rich characters, but there's always something. You know, Truvy is optimistic to a fault and probably overlooks too much, but she doesn't get burned by it. At least not in the movie. She probably has, but she's able to shrug it off. And I feel like that actually plays into Dolly Parton's persona really, really well. Yeah. I feel like she is just a person that has always made the best of it, being who she is, and playing, you know, in her country music persona as being the blonde girl with poofy hair and big boobs that all the men are lusting over, and she is now a billionaire. So who is really the smartest one there? But she probably had to endure a lot of bullshit to get there.
I mean, yes, she's talked a lot about that. I have an interesting point I want to pick up on with the Truvy character and the appearances and the beauty shop. However, do you have any other, because you said all the women have a thing. I wasn't sure if you had more you wanted to go into.
I'm just kind of going down and, can talk about the other characters before we get into that.
Yeah.
Daryl Hannah's character is kind of the, there's the least to her.
I think she's the most naive of the bunch.
She's the most naive. She is the most black and white as far as her, what she believes. She is, I guess, in the talk of, simple small town folk, she is the simplest of the simple small town folk. She believes what she believes, and that's the way it is. And she's not super three-dimensional, and that's her character, and that is what it is.
Oh, lighten up, Anel.
Yeah. There's Shelby, who... So for the person that got the only Oscar nomination in this, I find it a little bit interesting in that if you take this in a lot of Julia Roberts' other roles, this is not necessarily one I would think for her to be nominated for. But this is the 80s, and the Oscars were funny in the 80s, and because she dies, I think that's why she gets nominated for an award here.
Well, I think also you are putting this into the context of an entire career of Julia Roberts, when in 1989 an entire career did not exist yet for Julia Roberts.
Yeah, and there's the Oscar thing of nominating the young ingenue in a breakout role, in a role where she dies. It checks off a lot of these
Oscar
traditional Oscar boxes for campaigning and for pulling on somebody's heartstrings that's a voter. And it's a very traditional narrative and movie in a lot of ways that would appeal to a broad spectrum. I'm very surprised personally that it wasn't Shirley MacLaine, because she also ticks a lot of those Oscar boxes of being the funny, eccentric one within this, quite serious story on the outskirts of it, and being the most... It's a bit like when Sterling K. Brown got nominated a couple of years ago for American Fiction, where he is the chaos within otherwise what is a lot of characters that know who they are, even though that movie is wonderfully absurd in a lot of other ways.
So good.
Sterling K. Brown is just the unhinged coke addict brother.
And I think it's unfair to equate Ouiser with a coke addict, but
no.
And I'd argue Ouiser doesn't bring the chaos, right? Mm-hmm. The chaos is created by men.
Yes.
In this movie.
Totally. And I think to get back to Shelby's character, Shelby as a character is the most reckless, and kind of knowingly reckless in deciding she does want to go through with pregnancy, and then when as she suffers through going through dialysis and all going through the kidney transplant and all these things, just kind of goes back to being herself and trying to make the best of it. It's not her character is actually also a little bit one note in that way.
Yeah, Shelby is made out to be this very giving human, and I think that's probably true based on all of the stuff we see. She invites Anel to her wedding that day, all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Of the 6 women, Shelby, except perhaps Anel, but even I'm willing to go on this limb, Shelby's character is the least developed of the 6.
Yeah.
Because as much as it pains me to say this, because I think it's actually an excellent performance, and for whatever reason, Oscar or not Oscar, whatever that looks like, Shelby exists to make the story happen.
Yeah.
Shelby's not the point of this movie.
No.
The point is the other 5.
Mm-hmm. She exists to be the one who dies.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it leaves...
Spoiler alert?
Yeah. It leaves her mom, Malin, who I 100% know why Sally Field was cast in this movie, because Sally Field had made her career as a young actress really being someone that has that moment of anger and rage and will outwardly get angry at a person, at a system, at an injustice, at a whatever it is, and have the moment that is like the everything is building to Sally Field having a Sally Field moment, like she does in Norma Ray, where she is leading a union of auto workers, I think. I haven't actually seen Norma Ray, but I know that scene very, very well, where she holds up the union sign.
You haven't seen Norma... I can't believe you haven't seen Norma Ray.
No, seen clips, but that, like, she
Note
was...
to self.
She is super known as, like, this person that will have a very memorable emotional outburst, which she does in this movie at her daughter's funeral, which she, just is repressing emotions, even when her and Shelby have the argument, when Shelby tells her she's pregnant. She doesn't have an outburst. She gets, she's trying to be very rational and trying to make a point, and like, do you understand what you're doing? But knows that her daughter is just making a decision, and probably is hurt by Shelby coming back and saying, you're upset because you can't make that decision anymore. And that's not it at all. But she just knows, she's like, no, she's used to repressing the probably constant threat of Shelby having an attack.
Yeah.
And just knows that, even when she does have the attack in the salon, her mom knows exactly what to do, stays calm, keeps her daughter safe, gets her candy and juice, and it goes away. And almost immediately, life is back to normal. Like, she knows to be on guard mentally and emotionally at all times for that. And even when Shelby is in the hospital in a coma, her mom is always there and always reading to her and never wants to leave, because what if she wakes up? I need to be here when she wakes up. But she's not having like a big sloppy cry emotional breakdown at that point. She's just still, very stoic and needs to be there. And once Shelby is not there anymore and they pull her off the life support, she still doesn't have visibly an emotional breakdown until the end of the funeral. And the big dramatic scene that, if you haven't seen the movie, I won't go into too much detail, but it is the famous scene in Steel Magnolias. So, like, she's releasing all of this repressed emotional energy that now doesn't have to be there anymore. So everybody else seems like they have their thing that they need to be either on guard for or, have a defense mechanism for. And Ouiser doesn't. And it means that she can just be herself and be eccentric and run around with her oversized dog and tell everybody to go fuck themselves.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's kind of Ouiser's thing.
Yeah. Do you have any other points you wanted to talk about before? And I want to talk a bit about some of the film stuff.
Oh, fun.
All in one. But if you had more to talk about with characters or other things.
I am full of all sorts of thoughts.
Yes.
I'm just going to... This is a small thread that you just talked about. Mm-hmm. Is it Malin that can't have her emotional breakdown, or is the only place that's safe for women to have emotional outbursts is with other women in this movie?
Maybe.
And I think this is where I really pick up on it. And full disclosure, this is how I operate in a crisis. Mm-hmm. So maybe Malin just has ADHD. Maybe she's also neurospicy. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's, okay, here's what we have to do. I'm going to sit with her. What if she wakes up for 2 minutes and I'm not here? Mm-hmm. Which I think is the fear of a lot of folks who have a loved one who's going through something like this. Mm-hmm. That's not misplaced. She's the only one who sits with her when they turn off the life support because the men can't handle it. The brothers, her husband, like Jackson, and Drum, none of them can handle it. Mm-hmm. It's only her. She is the one who comes out and says basically, well, she's gone. You have to call, you call Clary to call the funeral home.
Yeah.
Because she knows Clary will handle it because women getting shit done.
Yeah.
Jackson, you need to get her pink suit. This is what we have to do. It's very matter of fact, but it's also very, the women do the heavy lifting in everything here. Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't have time to have an emotional outburst with the men because they need to have their hands held and told how to handle this. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Drum is completely unsupportive. I think you make some good points about him being there in places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that he fully knows how. I think Spud, same. Because emotional intelligence for men, especially in the 80s, not really a thing. We've come a long way in 36 years. But when you look at what M'Lynn does, and her in particular, and the women, Clary kind of talks about being a widow, to the other women, and it almost feels like the only place it's safe for them to have emotions is with the other women. They can't do it with their husbands. They can't do it with their sons. They can't do it with their boyfriends, even.
And I think I think that's true with all of the female characters.
Yes.
I think the thing about M'Lynn and how she chooses to deal with it is probably more damaging to her personally, because when there are those points where she's in the hospital, or her daughter's in the hospital, or when they're at the funeral, they never show the funeral. They don't show the entirety of the service. They don't show the entirety of, her being in a coma in the hospital. They show snippets, but they only show certain parts of it when her mom is there. And in each of those situations, M'Lynn is there not only longer than anybody else, but longer, arguably, than you really need to be there. Like, she can't move on because she is, for so long, had this guarded thing of her daughter having very severe diabetes. And so she knows that she has to be ready and prepared at all times. And then when she's in the hospital and they've taken her off life support and everybody's left, and then she talks about, she's like, I was just there. I was there for a long time. I kept holding her hand. I feel like they probably had to go in and drag her away. And, at the funeral, she has the big outburst after the service when the casket's at the cemetery, and she just is standing there. Everyone else is leaving. She just can't go anywhere. She's paralyzed by it. So I think all of the, everybody has their thing to guard against their emotional outbursts in other places. And M'Lynn has it so severely that when she's really faced with it, she can't actually, she's totally paralyzed by it.
Well, that's fair. And this is another theme that I pick up on in this, and particularly because I have a mom. Hi, Mom, if you're listening. Moms and daughters.
Yes.
M'Lynn is the only one who has a daughter. The other women do not, ostensibly. We don't actually hear a lot about Clary.
Or Ouiser.
Ouiser says she has 2 ungrateful children.
Yeah.
So perhaps she has 2 ungrateful sons. We don't actually know. But based on the information we're given, M'Lynn is the one with a daughter. And so the relationship between mothers and daughters is always very interesting. I think that Shelby trying to get independence from her mom is very much a thing a lot of young women go through with their moms. If you have any semblance of close relationship, or even if you don't, there is a lot to be said about the way that M'Lynn can't let go, because she's so used to being her daughter's protector. Even when she gets married, you cut to M'Lynn's face, and when they're leaving, Drum's smiling his face off, and it takes M'Lynn a minute to remember she's supposed to be happy about letting her baby go, and then she waves. And I don't know that I have a lot more to say about that. I just, the relationship between women, in particular mothers and daughters, and what kind of struggle that can be, is a very interesting thread. And there's a lot of other movies and a lot of other media and a lot of just conversations to be had about that, especially in the 80s and what that looks like. Yep. So there was that. I do have one other thought. We've kind of touched on it, but I'd like to just ask the question. What function does gossip serve in this movie?
I mean, it's 90% of the movie.
And what does that say about women supporting one another?
Yeah.
Again, I go back to Lady Bridgerton. Shout out to the people who've made me watch Bridgerton. You know who you are.
Hi, Ashley.
Went to Ashley, Bree, Heather, Portia. Listen, there's a lot of you. The point is, when she is trying to get out of a sticky situation for her daughter, I'm not going to ruin Bridgerton. We ruin other things in this podcast. But when she's trying to get her daughter out of a sticky situation, she says, "We shall do what women will do," because there is a comment about, well, no one will believe no one will believe women.
Yeah.
And she says, well, we shall do what women do. We will talk. And all of the safe spaces for the women in this movie are them talking.
Yeah.
Yes, they're getting their hair done. Yes, they're getting their nails done. Yes, they're doing all these other things that are stereotypically considered female or feminine or women. But this movie functions on gossip, quote unquote, and that is really just the passing of information. And I get incensed when people talk about how gossip is the worst. Now, that said, gossip can be very damaging. I want to be clear that when you are malicious with how you pass information along, that is actually incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of gossip has a very negative connotation. So if we talk about having conversations as women, and that's where you find the support. These women only have that support because they talk to each other. Clary talks about, they gossip about the new mayor's wife. And I don't think I am unfair in saying the way she's filmed in the dance scene is incredibly unkind. There's
Costuming did her dirty.
Conversation about Lycra. We don't need to go into that too much. There is an interesting conversation there, too, from Truvy, which I have one more thought to pick up on before we go into the actual film part. But I think Clary is actually really upset about the loss of her husband.
Yeah.
And it's never said. Just, we had it until November, and then it sounds like he passed away rather suddenly.
Yeah.
And the women feel better by really picking apart a different woman, and that's the part that is malicious, and I don't love that. But it's the conversations that are happening that are saying the things that don't need to be said and not saying the things that do, but we're all picking up on it at the same time.
Yeah. This movie is definitely the great-granddaughter of The Women, which you may not have seen the movie, but we've watched the stage show of The Women.
Good. Love the movie, too.
And it's a classic one where it involves 5 or 6 female main characters, and actually there's no men in it at all. But a lot of it takes place in spaces where they are together, talking, gossiping. That one's a little more malicious because there's a whole thread of one of the women stealing one of the other one's husband away.
There is that.
So there's that, but this is the one that it stands on the back of, as far as a style of, yes, this is how. This is what women do. They talk, as you said.
And somebody like Delta Burke in Designing Women as well, right? Designing Women is very much, it's also Southern, so there's that. I have one more thought about Truvy and beauty. Something Truvy says early on, because she talks a little bit throughout the movie about her rules, right? And one of the rules she's always stood by is that there's no such thing as natural beauty.
Yeah.
That's it. That's really the one thing I wanted to point out. A lot of this happens in a hair salon, beauty parlor, glamour technician, I believe is what she calls it now.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of appearances. Everything's about appearances.
Yeah.
And you talked about, making the Louisiana small town folk seem simple. And one of the things, the thread I kind of wanted to pull at is, everything seems simple on the surface, but is it really? Ouiser seems cranky on the surface. She's not.
Yeah.
Clary seems flippant on the surface. Is she? Truvy's cares so much about beauty, and it's okay that my husband's useless, but is it? Right? Malin is more concerned about her daughter, and I think that's also true, but what else is going on? So there's this, I don't want to be like, ooh, small towns, because you know how I love talking about those. Yeah. But there is something about Southern sensibilities in particular and how important appearance is to them. And there's no such thing as natural beauty. If there is, we're out of a job, which is like a ha-ha, but also there is no such thing as natural beauty, because if everybody exists the way they actually are, that very polished surface of a Southern sensibility, you don't upset people, you don't have emotional outbursts, you don't ask a lot of questions, you make these big weddings and all that sort of things, you don't have condoms on getaway cars. All of that goes away. So it's a movie about women and supporting women as they are in places where they're not perceived by anybody else.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
Clary would probably frickin' die if other people saw her having her hair bleached the white blonde that it is, right?
Yeah.
Because Ouiser makes a comment about go get your roots done when they're making up.
Yeah.
It's, for me, I think the ethos of the movie in terms of character and that sort of conversation is it's about female friendships, but it's about women supporting one another and being able to be who they are under the surface in places where they're not perceived by anybody other than their closest other women.
Yep.
And that's probably why the mayor's wife upsets them so much.
Yeah.
She didn't give a shit. She doesn't wear Lycra, which Truvy says she hasn't left the house without Lycra on her thighs since 1970 schmur. And Clarie comments, that's because you were raised right. Was she? Interesting.
Yeah. That also is just probably a good business slogan for her. She probably drums up a lot of business in town just by telling people that natural beauty doesn't exist. And...
Well, she does say, if you believe it does part of a job, which is fair, is also partly what she does. But I think that for me is kind of the thesis of the movie.
Yeah.
And also, as somebody who firmly loathes things like Spanx and Skims coming for you, Kim Kardashian, that conversation about she wore that tight dress and she paid so much money and she didn't even bother to wear the things underneath. Why do we have to be uncomfortable as women to look good? Baloney. Anyway, that is not about the movie. That is a Riots Not Diets rant for another day.
I believe you have a poem about that.
I have several.
Yeah.
I also have earrings that say Fat and Fabulous Riots Not Diets.
Yeah.
And also ones that talk about smashing the patriarchy. I have a theme. That is important on International Women's Day weekend and in Women's History Month while we're recording this. Not for whatever you want to talk about in terms of the actual filming of the movie. And I'm fascinated about what you have to say with that because it's such an interesting movie in terms of how it time jumps for reasons.
Yeah, and as I talked about certainly in our first couple of episodes, that having a bit of a background in doing some film studies and such, there's things that I'll pick up on in movies that I learned a bit about there, or kind of will stick out and be like, oh yeah, that brings out this theme.
Yeah, which I don't always look at, so I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, and it's part of movies, and when they get made, like people making movies will do that in a way that isn't super showy. Sometimes it is very showy, but a lot of times they're just trying to convey something to an audience, and if they convey it without them realizing it, then they've succeeded.
Hooray!
There's actually not a lot about that to say in this movie. And I found that kind of interesting. There are some very specific ones, but throughout the movie, there's not a lot of like filmmaking choices that you can point to and say, oh, this really means this. Like, a lot of it is shot incredibly standard, incredibly stock, not a lot of crazy camera movements or weird editing tricks or, things other than a couple of things that I'm going to pick up on. And the last point I have is, I think, maybe the reason why that is.
Oh, interesting.
The two that I kind of that stood out to me immediately have to do with, first of all, the jump cuts in time.
Yes.
As you mentioned. I actually had to ask you at one point, I'm like, wait, what happened in the first one? Because the wedding happens at Easter, and then suddenly they're at the fair, which happens at Christmas.
Yeah, that cuts to Christmas lights.
And it cuts to Christmas, but it cuts in a way that is just what you would normally call a continuity cut, where it's just like, oh, it's all just happening at the same time, and this is just from one location to another at the same time, without a visual indicator of any kind, or even like sometimes they'll even just have something that happens, or a character says something, that then you have an immediate cut to something different, and there's a clue about what happens. So it was pretty jarring the first time. It's
yeah,
like, oh,
it absolutely can be.
Okay. And then by the second time it happens, you get used to it, and time jumps to a bunch of different times. But when you get to Shelby being in the hospital, it has a lot of the same cuts, so you actually have kind of zero idea how long Shelby's been in the hospital for. Might be 3 days, might be 3 months.
Yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
really know. So that was, if that choice was leading up to that was like, okay, this actually, there's some ambiguity in that part of it that's interesting. I think there's a reason why they chose to do those cuts, which again I'm going to save till my last point.
Ooh, good. I think we might hit on the same point.
Maybe. the jump cut to after Jack Jr. has been born, when they're hanging around as a family, and you see Jack Jr. bouncing on Shelby's lap, and then it goes around to everybody looking at Jack Jr. or grabbing him or this and that. There's a very, very deliberate thing in that scene where you don't see Shelby's face.
Correct.
It's the camera stays just at like shoulder height. Her hair is actually pulled back, so you don't see her longer hair, which...
Well, she still has it.
Well, she still has it at that point, yeah. So there's no identifier that it's Julia Roberts. Could be anybody, but you kind of are, it's her because the next scene when they walk to the salon, she's wearing the same yellow blouse as that. So that's the part that connects it, but you don't see her face at all. And I had the inkling that Julia Roberts' character was going to die when she was having the attack early on. If I didn't pick up on it then, I would have picked up on it there. To be like, aha. The baby has been born, coming. And now her character is not even important enough to be in this scene, even though she's her mother, or his mother. So that was very an interesting filmmaking-y thing. Yeah. That I was like, okay, that is a very interesting choice. And a nice little thing that you can do in a movie that you can't necessarily do in a lot of other parts. So it's like, it was a nice filmic touch.
It's also his first birthday, by the way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, when the scenes where she is in the hospital on life support.
Okay.
There's no musical score in the background at all through any of it. Mm-mm. Which is a very effective touch, because the score isn't a big part of the rest of the movie, like a lot of movies, but the absence of it makes the silence deafening, and it adds the seriousness to it. And I was like, oh, okay, that was another very clear film choice, although it could have been, probably was a choice in the play as well, but was a thing that actually made a pretty big impact, because it also stayed exactly the same through all of the cuts in that area, where it was always just ambient noise and no score. So I did find that really interesting, and it kind of stood out as a nice touch.
Yeah, no, I love that. Now that you're saying, I've picked up on it, but to put, I love when the score, or the filmic choices connect with things that I feel are the theme. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, yeah. Love it.
Honestly, that's the end of anything I picked up on. And I think the reason for that is my last point. Uh-huh. This was relatively well known at the time, and they show it in the opening credits of the film. This was an adaptation of a stage play.
This is a play.
Yeah. And it was a play originally 2 years before. The writer of the screenplay, which I wrote down, Robert Harling, is the writer of the play as well. Yeah. So and there's a lot of movies where you have that, where a playwright will adapt their work for a movie or for different medium, maybe TV. And sometimes they work on it and then hand it over and get a screenwriter to work on certain things to maybe make them work in film, or maybe add some of those touches. I couldn't find a lot of that in this, and there wasn't any special features on the DVD, I don't think, to go back. And maybe there is, and maybe I should spend a bit more time on that. But it didn't feel like there was a lot of consideration to making this a movie, as opposed to more of a filmed version of the play in a real space. But you're still in a lot of static spaces. You're in the salon, you're in a house, you're in a cemetery, you're in a hospital. So there's not a lot of movement between places. You're in a place, but you can very easily see how this would be staged as a play. And there are a lot of movies that are plays and have been, done as a play first and then made into movies. Some of them are really, really effective. I was trying to think last night. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is maybe the one that sticks out immediately to me.
It's so good as a play as well.
It's so good as a play, good. But as a film, it works as a solo piece.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, one or the other.
Streetcar Named Desire. So the other one that I was like, this this is wonderful. The movie is excellent. And even though you can see very clearly how it would be staged as a play, there are things about the movie that make it stand out as a movie. There are also some movies that were plays beforehand that kind of don't really work all that well as standalone movies. And the one that I really thought of that is an outstanding play, but as a movie, I remember watching it and going like, oh yeah, this is the play, but then upon reflection, Glengarry Glen Ross.
Oh, Glengarry Glen Ross.
And David Mamet has a lot of plays that have been made into films, and it's not a David Mamet thing, but Glengarry Glen Ross, as a movie, exists for the ABC speech and exists for the like moments that the actors have, the soliloquies and the like combative scenes. And I mean, that's one of the most stacked male acting rosters in movie history. Like, that one has some of the greatest performers of all time. But it doesn't really come together as a movie so well as the stage play does.
Yeah, the play's fantastic.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like Steel Magnolias is more impactful. Having not seen it as a stage play, I feel like this is a more impactful play than it is as a movie.
Fair.
And
I can see that.
You know, any of the real like tentpole moments in the movie aren't great because they're in a movie. They're great because of the writing. They're great because of the characters. They're great because of the actor playing that role, or the speech they're giving, or the moments they're having. It's not like those moments I mentioned about not showing Shelby's face and the score being out and the time jumps and the cuts. I don't actually know if the time jump and the cut worked so well, but it was at least a choice. But everything else is a stage play. And as a movie, it kind of doesn't quite come together. And I think if I were to have seen the play of this, it's a bit like when you read a book and watch a movie based on that book and you go, oh, they basically just filmed a book. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get a book where they make a movie and you go, holy shit, that was an incredible movie. This one, and like, as much the story is excellent, the characters are the best thing about it. But if this wasn't a movie and just existed as an incredibly famous, well-known play, that would be enough, probably.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A couple things. One, love that you picked up on David Mamet. And if anybody's listened to the first episode of this, I talk about how David Mamet can't write women.
Yes.
So it's hilarious that came up in a discussion about a movie that is all about women. So thanks for bringing up my bestie, David Mamet.
Thought that was a fun juxtaposition.
Thanks for doing that. He's great. I do actually really like David Mamet plays, but he can't write women to save his life.
There's no women in Glengarry Glen Ross.
For a reason, though there should be. We can come back to that another day. I agree with you. I love this movie. I've loved this movie for many moons. It is one of my favorite movies if I want to cry. Not so much because of Shelby's death, but because of everybody else's reaction to it and how I move through grief myself. So I think it's, especially as an adult now, I can see sort of those parallels. I think it's a great movie because of the things you pointed out, right? It is great because the actors are great. It's great because the characters are great. It's great because the story is good and built around these women and what is the thread. But it's absolutely a play. Those time jumps and the way it just kind of goes boop, boop, that's lights going down and coming back up.
Yes, and that's, when I initially thought, what the heck's going on? And knew it was a play and it just kept going that way, I'm like, that's a trope that works on stage.
Yes.
Doesn't necessarily work in movies, but you can totally see where they got that choice from.
It is absolutely a scene change. It's a scene change. It's lights going down on stage right on the wedding setup, and it's lights coming up stage left on Truvies.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's what it is.
Totally. The only other really thing in the movie that kind of would tell you that it's a movie is the very last shot of the movie as the credits are going, when they have the like helicopter shot of the motorcycle that he's got, what's his name in the bunny costume?
Sammy and an Easter bunny on the back of a motorcycle. The man driving it who has rainbow hair, who's chasing down the van that has his mom, dad, and the pregnant woman in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it again, it's like, oh, this is a movie, but there's not a reason behind it other than just to show that they're driving. And it's like, hey, look, we rented a helicopter for this shot. Look what we
did.
Cool. So yeah, when I looked it up and saw that the writer of the screenplay was also the writer of the play, that part of what I was thinking made sense, because
Absolutely
it's probably somebody writing for the stage. Mm-hmm. And just having it kind of be a filmed version of that. So I'd be interested to see
the stage version.
Yeah, the stage version. I'd also be interested to see if it were like, if this movie were made by Mike Nichols or Nancy Myers or Nicole Holofcener or someone that is a movie director and maybe has a touch where they can bring stuff to a film that you wouldn't be able to do on stage, and what they might do with that. No shade to Herbert Ross. I've only seen one other of his films, The Goodbye Girl, which is a fun movie, and is Richard Dreyfuss won an Oscar for it, I think. And it's a fun, like, romantic movie and has an interesting premise, and it's funny to watch him do very overwrought Shakespeare as a small Shakespearean actor. But it also is not like a movie where you would watch it and mistake him for Steven Spielberg or
That's
anything
fair.
like that. So it'd be interesting to see if somebody got a hold of this that might be like, oh, I'm going to do something here that might transform some of this material to be a film rather than a filmed version of the play.
I'd be interested to see, there is a remake of this that is, I believe, a Lifetime series.
Okay.
In 2012. And the actors include, but are not limited to, Queen Latifah and Felicia Rashad. So I'd be interested to see how that shakes down. It's still set in Louisiana.
Yep.
It is, I believe, an all-black female cast.
Okay.
And is given more airtime than an hour and a half long movie or whatever that happens to be.
Series.
So I'd be interested to see what that looks like. But we don't need to talk about that today.
No, because we haven't seen it.
It is time for the traditional, I have to ask the question. What'd you think?
So I thought the characters and the acting was, from all the female leads, all 6 of them, was pretty good to great.
Yeah.
All the way around. I think they, maybe other than Daryl Hannah's character, all had some really good moments that you could hang your hat on and kind of go like, yeah, this was their best moment. Unfortunately, Daryl Hannah wasn't given that as a character, which is fine. You don't have to. You can play 6th fiddle when the other 5 fiddles are these women.
Yes.
Somebody has to be the set dressing, and that's okay. But yeah, I thought the acting and the characters were really good. It's probably not a movie I would need to watch again or go back to, just because I don't think there's a lot you would get out of watching something again and again, other than maybe hearing some of those character and story bits that, as you pointed out, on a first watch, kind of they wash over you a little bit.
That's why you had me.
Yeah. And, I think if we got a chance and we're somewhere where they were doing a stage version of this, I would absolutely want to go see it.
Yes.
Because I think it would be really interesting to see how they did it, to see that characterization come to life live on stage. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, it was a good watch. It was a lot I enjoyed about it, but not one I necessarily think I would go back to, even though I enjoyed it quite a bit.
That's fair.
Yeah.
It's rent-free in your head, one of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kidding. I have some rent-free.
But yes, give me all the Shirley MacLaine. That is the point of all of this.
Right. 5 Ouiser entrances out of 5.
5 Ouisers out of 5. Absolutely.
5 Ouisers out of 5. Excellent. It is one of my favorites, mostly because I love a good cry, and it is one that I can go back to when I need that. But I take all of your thoughts into account. It's not a perfect movie by any stretch.
It's also not like, it is an easy watch in bits, and obviously a tough watch in other bits, but I can also see why it's so popular, why it was a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, you can understand why it is what it is.
Yeah, a lot of people would want to go back and revisit those characters,
and
for sure.
Boy, howdy is it a product of the 80s, including the hats on the bridesmaids, but that is a whole other aesthetic conversation.
Yeah.
So now that you have seen Steel Magnolias, I believe it's time for our next adventure.
And for that next adventure, we're actually going to stay in the same time period of movie making. We're going to go 1 year later to a Martin Scorsese film.
Indeed.
Which is one you have never seen, and I have seen many times, and is going to be a fun one. Next episode, we are going to be doing Goodfellas.
I can't wait to see if the aesthetics are the same.
They are not.
Don't ruin it for me.
Yes, so thank you all for listening, and the next time you hear from us, we will be discussing Ray Liotta and Robert De Niro and Lorraine Bracco and Joe Pesci and Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas.